Okay. So 5 essentials, very basically, are the 5 essentials. If we get them right, they form the core skill required to sail a boat properly, and that is both cruiser and dinghy. There are a few minor things that you don't need to worry about. If it's a cruiser with a fixed keel, so you can ignore the idea of centreboard, but all the other things about sails, balance, trim, they and course made good are all exactly the same. So this is really what underpins anyone from the likes of us to Ben Ainsley, are the 5 essentials. And actually the way the RYA have created these, they do act as a checklist for when you're on the water, and 90% of the time you won't be sitting there thinking, oh, what are the 5 essentials, because actually it become quite instinctive after a while. But they are quite useful, especially if you're finding that someone is sailing faster than you. You can then go through your checklist of the 5 essentials and see what you're doing wrong to make your boat sail faster. So this is level 2, as I've said, so don't worry if you don't remember it now. So we're going to take you through each of the 5 essentials. Now, on a level 2 course, what tends to happen is that we will run through this either on the water before we then go into the classroom to discuss it further, or we might do it in the classroom and then go on the water to demonstrate it. Now, normally I quite like to do it on the water first, just because then it makes sense in the classroom. But so you'll just have to imagine you've had an excellent morning sail, and we're now going to talk about the 5 essentials. So the very first one is sail set. So do you remember we did the points of sail with John, and which was what, last week, the week before? Can't remember now.
Last week.
Last week. And we also talked about how sails work. So that was about the high pressure and the low pressure, and upwind you're effectively sucked along into the low pressure, and then downwind, depending on your angle. If you're on a run, as you can see on the diagram, then you're more pushed along than sucked along. So you have to, if you think about those, when it comes to sail set, what you really want to do is you want to make sure that if you're in a 2-sail boat, that your mainsail and your jib are working efficiently together. And one of the easy ways of knowing whether your sails are efficiently set is you can ease your mainsail or jib out until the front of it, we call it the luff, but the front of the sail starts to flap. It does that, you just pull it in very slightly until it stops, and then you know that your sail is, as it were, as far out as it can go to be an efficient sail. Some of our dinghies have bits of thread and cotton through them called telltales, and they help you give a very quick visual reference to whether your sail is efficiently working. One of the things we demonstrate on the water is that the front sail, the jib, when the wind hits it, if it's there on its own and you're not touching the rudder, the jib will turn the boat away from the wind. Yeah. So the mainsail will actually, when the wind hits it and you're not touching the rudder and the boat is level, will sail the boat up into the wind. So that's why you need to make sure that you balance your jib and your mainsail, so they're not trying to fight each other, they're working in harmony. So sail set effectively is reminding you that what you really need to do is make sure that you've got your sails in the right position for the angle to the wind that you're sailing, and that you have both of them eased out as far as they will go before they start to flap. Now, you'll find a lot of sailors are playing the main sheet so that the mainsail is going in and out all the time. They're testing that no-go zone, and they're testing whether they've got the sail working efficiently. So as you can see at the bottom, how do you know when you've got it efficiently? Always let the sail out till it flaps. Don't have to let it all the way out, just a little bit. You want to see that front of the sail twitch, and then you pull it in until it stops twitching. And you do that with both sails, and then you'll find actually you'll probably sail faster than someone who's pulled their mainsail in too far, which will slow them down, or they've let it out too far, which will slow them down. Now, the likes of John and myself in very windy weather, you will find that we might have to let our mainsail out quite a lot and let the front of it flat because we're quite skinny and light. You know, if you're 10 stone, you have a bit more of fights with 15 knots of wind than if you're 15 stone. So again, you are in a way sailing your boat efficiently, because actually it's all about then keeping, as John will talk about, it's all about then your boat balance and trim to keep the boat sailing efficiently. But ultimately, when you're in your boat and you're sailing, you just need to think about whether your sails are the most efficiently set in order to sail the boat as fast as possible. Okay, I shall hand over to John.
Yeah, all right. So this next one is about balance left and right in the boat. And this one's quite important because I suppose, one, it affects steering, but two, the optimal place you want to have a balance is upright. And a flat boat is a fast boat. But not only that, it's easier to control because when you have the boat lean to leeward or to windward, it will try and turn in a particular direction. If you heel the boat to the left, then it wants to turn to the right, and when you heel the boat to the right, it wants to turn to the left. And I suppose in a sailing boat, when you're powered up, usually the boat might want to heel to leeward, and when it does that, it will try to steer up into the wind, and that's quite normal. But when it does that, you might want to correct it. Basically, it will be harder to steer in a straight line if you have it heeled more. So it's best to keep it upright. So yeah, I suppose in a yacht, all you can do really to control the balance left and right is to have less sail area out. Or I've seen yacht sailors dump the main before by letting the mainsail out a bit. In a dinghy, you want to be moving your body weight around to keep the boat flat, and you can ask the crew to move as well. So maybe in light winds, you might want to have you and the crew sitting on opposite sides to balance each other. But when the wind starts to pick up, you both want to be sat on the same side, balancing the sail, and then, if necessary, hiking out of the boat. But if it gets to the point where you can't actually balance the sail by hiking out, you need to actually let the main sheet out to dump some of the power, then you can pull it back in. So that's balance. That's the next one of the 5 essentials.
John, you've got to say it, John. You've got to pretend you're Chris Whitty and you're giving a presentation about COVID. What's the phrase?
Next slide, please, Boris. Or yeah, but anyone want to talk about balance or sail setting? Anyone have any questions about those? Or? No, all right. All right. The next one is trim, and this is about moving the weight in the boat forwards and backwards, and this affects the kind of like the shape of the boat underneath the waterline. And essentially, if you it's important to have it like roughly in the right place. If you move your weight too far back, what happens is the back digs in, and the back is kind of like a flat shape. It's really not hydrodynamic at all. So you don't have the back dug in, and if you do that, you'll know about it because the boat will sound like a washing machine, and it will slow you down. So you want to be far enough forward so the back hasn't dug in, and your boat doesn't sound like a washing machine. But when you sail upwinds, you want the maximum amount of grip against the water, so you won't be pushed sideways. And you can get extra grip by moving forwards. So I would say you want to sit about as upwind. You want to sit about as far forward as you can be comfortable, probably slightly uncomfortable maybe. Like you probably want the crew right against the shrouds, the wires holding the mast up, and you probably want to be sitting kind of as close to the crew as you can when you're going upwind. But it depends on the conditions. And then going downwind, you can sit a bit further back. If you ever end up on the plane, it doesn't actually matter how far back you go. The further back, the better probably. But yeah, yeah. So it's kind of like a bit of there's a bit of a happy medium, so somewhere in the middle. If you go really far forward, the boat becomes really tippy. If you go too far back, the boat sounds like a washing machine. So you sort of want the happy medium somewhere in the middle, and the closer to when you get the further forward you want to move in the boat.
Yeah, and you can feel it, can't you, on the rudder as well, John?
That's right.
If you sit too far back, it becomes really heavy, and if you sit too far forward, it becomes really light and actually slightly unresponsive.
Yeah.
It is a weird feeling. I've managed to capsize a dinghy by sitting too far forward. What we basically did was we sat so far forward that the boat just rolled over on top of us because we removed its buoyancy. I'd never done that before.
Oh wow.
But it's worth, even in a keel where you've got 100 kilos of lead weight, moving your body weight around really makes a difference. And actually on a yacht, it can make a difference. How you stow your yacht and then where you put your crew when you're sailing can actually make a difference as well, which is why you find all the unused crew tend to be sitting on the windward side with their feet over the side of the boat and they're hanging over the guardrail. That's about moving their body weight up onto the windward side to basically try to act as a downward pressure, so you can keep the sail pinned in where you need it to sail faster. So they're all trying to use the 5 essentials.
All right then. Next slide, please, Boris. And you're going to do centerboard?
Yeah, I can do centerboard.
Okay.
So again, you can ignore this one if you're in a keel, because we always keep a keel tied down when it's on the water, and you can ignore it if you're in a yacht that doesn't have a lifting keel. However, the centerboard, do you remember when we were talking about the sail set and how sails work, that I talked about the lateral resistance in the water from a keel or a centerboard? So that's what this piece of wood or fiberglass does. So when you're sailing upwind, if you had no centerboard in, you would just, the wind would blow onto your sails, you would go forward, but you'd also go sideways. So you want to stop that sideways motion. So you put the centerboard all the way down, and that provides you with that extra depth in the water and that resistance against the water, which will then squirt you forwards. Of course, as you sail away from the wind, you don't need quite so much lateral resistance in the water, so you can afford to cut down on what's effectively dragging. You're dragging this piece of wood through plastic through the water, so in itself it is sort of slowing you down. So upwind is like a compromise between the drag of having a centerboard in the water and actually wanting to sail forwards. But as you move away from the wind, you can lift that centerboard up. So as the diagram beautifully drawn by me last night with a gin glass, it shows you that as you sail away, if you go onto a beam reach, which is where the wind now is blowing onto the side of the boat rather than onto the front or the bow of the boat, you can actually bring your centerboard up halfway. That cuts down on the drag, but also you've got enough in the water that will continue to push you to get you going forwards. And then as you move away from the wind, so you're now on a beam reach, you lift it up to 3/4, and then it's fully up on a dead run. And by that, I mean the wind is properly right behind you. Now, of course, there are caveats to this. And one of those is that we sail on a tidal stretch of the Thames. So what you'll find is that some people, and I am one of those, sorry, I've just let someone in.
Wow. Okay.
That some of those people like myself, I keep my centerboard down all the time because I'm lazy, because I haven't sorted out an issue with the friction pads, but also that if the tide is not in your favor, actually you need your centerboard to help you work around the river. Now, John, who sails a laser, will sail a different tactic to me in a two-person boat. But ultimately, what we're trying to get people to think about with the centerboard is, do I need my centerboard? If I do, how much of it do I need? And it's based on what angle am I sailing to the wind? Am I sailing close hauled to the wind? Am I sailing across it, away from it, or directly away from it? And those will be your reference points to tell you about whether you need your centerboard. Now, the other thing you will find, especially on the tidal Thames, is if you keep your centerboard up and you're sailing across the wind, but you can see you're actually going sideways quite a lot. If you put the centerboard down, you'll feel a difference. The boat will move. You'll feel that resistance in the water, and it's worth experimenting, because that will then start to tell you about, actually on a tidal water, do I need my centerboard? Do I don't? Of course, if you're sailing downwind with the tide, you don't need your centerboard, because everything's in the right direction. You're on that conveyor belt down to the next mark or to Greenhithe to the pub. But actually, if the tide was against you and you were attacking, and you were going downwind, you might want to put a bit of centerboard down, just to give you a little bit of assistance. So that really is the centerboard. The centerboard is your friend. Use it wisely. Are there any questions about the centerboard?
Yeah, just one thing. The name centerboard, I mean, I've always been told that it's called a dagger board, and the centerboard is the one that's on a pivot. So is the word dagger board going out of fashion?
No, not at all. Sorry, the 5 essentials refer to it as a centerboard, but you are absolutely right, Patrick. So while I've been calling it a centerboard technically is a pivoting dagger board. Yeah, so a dagger board is called a dagger board because, like a dagger, you drive it in and you pull it out in a sort of mad frenzy of sailing lust, whereas the centerboard is on a pivot, and so it will rotate up and down on that pivot. But they both do exactly the same thing, and it's the same on a yacht. If you've got a lifting keel on a yacht, that does the same thing. So there'll be a certain amount of fixed keel, and then you wind a handle or you have an electric motor, and either the keel will rotate downwards or it'll drop down through. So it does exactly the same thing, Patrick.
Yeah. Ooh, one more thing. The reason why in a laser or a topper you would never take the centerboard all the way up is because it is a dagger board. So it would, like, if you pull it all the way up, it would interfere with boom in the kicker. And if you jibed, like, it would actually hit it. So yeah, you can't actually take it all the way up without it getting hit by the boom sometimes. But you don't need to anyway. You just take it up all the way that you actually can take it up.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And welcome, David. We'll do a quick recap at the end, just so that you can fly us with any questions that come to you.
So thank you.
Course made good. Over to you, John.
Yeah, go on. And so this one is about the route that you sail to where you're trying to get to, and it's not always going to be a straight line. In fact, even like if you ignore this, if you're not zigzagging, it's still probably not a straight line. And it's really up to you which route you want to take. And the reason it might be different is because things like wind and tide. So at a basic level, when you're sailing upwind, you don't want to be sort of like 15 degrees off the wind. You want to be as close to wind as you can get without slowing yourself down. If you don't do that, you're not making enough headway. So it'll take you a lot longer to get upwind. So you've got to sort of hold
Sorry,
if you could go,
sorry, apologies.
yeah, all right, cheers, yeah. So you always want to be, when you're going upwind, you always want to be as close to wind as you can get. And wind changes, so when it does, you want to kind of follow it, or you might decide that it's more efficient to be on the other tack than tack, and use the other tack while the wind's in a slightly different direction. The other massive thing that affects us at Era is the tide, and people will actually plan their sailing around the tide completely. So depending on whether you're fighting the tide or going with the tide, you either want to be in the middle of the river, so the tide is strongest in the middle of the river and it's weaker on the edges. So you either might decide to sail in the middle of the river to go with the tide, or you might, when you're going against the tide, you might want to go to the outside where the tide's weaker. In fact, the difference is huge. So yeah, if you think about the tide and gust, you might decide to choose an appropriate course based on that. And also, for instance, imagine there's a sheltered area and it's really windy, you might decide that's the better place to sail. Or you might decide you want to sail where there's more waves or less waves, depending on whether you like waves or not.
No, you're absolutely right, John. And if any of you watched the America's Cup, one of the reasons why you'd find that they might split and go completely separate courses is because they're making their own judgment of what is the course made good. And if you listen to people like Ben Ainsley and Giles Scott, who is his tactician, you would hear them talking about where the gusts were coming from, and that's what they were looking for. So they were seeking the stronger wind to make them sail faster, to get to the mark quicker. So this is what I mean by the 5 essentials, is something that everyone from from the top down will do, whether they know it or not.
When you talk about gusture, you mean talking about a gust, it gives you a lift and it pushes your boat forward quicker.
That's right, or where you can see where the gusts hit the water, but by the time they might get to, let's say, the right hand side of the course, they've dissipated, so they're less strong. So actually, if they're hitting on the left hand side and they're favourable, that's where you want to be, because that will make you sail faster and point higher. Whereas you might have someone like me pottering along by the moorings, and John's disappeared off up to the race mark because he's spotted, that these gusts are in his favour. Whereas I've decided to take a completely different route. So yeah, and actually sailing on tidal waters, it's a compromise between the various sort of competing factors that sort of are determined to slow you down when you're equally determined to sail as fast as you can.
I've got a good example of this, and it was probably about last year when I started sailing with Luke.
Yeah.
And Luke will remember it well. So we're in the bosun.
Is this when we went to the Jennings Tree Buoy?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
We went to the Jennings Tree Buoy, which is upriver from the club, and the tide's coming in like pretty fast. And we're near the Jennings Tree Buoy, and the wind dies, and we're just getting swept like up the river away from the club. And we're thinking, like, what are we gonna do? Like, are we gonna have to tie the boat up and go to the pub for the next 6 hours until the tide turns? But what we realized was we were actually in a wind shadow because we're in that part of the river. And if we crossed over to the other side of the river, we'd have more wind and we'd actually be able to beat back against the tide. So through choosing a course made good that was effective, we actually were able to get back to the club, considering instead of having to leave the boat there for 3 hours while the tide turned.
Yeah, it was good actually.
Yeah.
So what have we mentioned? So we've spoken about sails, boat balance, boat trim, the centreboard, and our course made good. But what one item is missing that you would expect to see on a list of 5 essentials?
The weather?
Not the weather.
Rudder.
The rudder. So the rudder's not on the list of 5 essentials, which you would expect it to be, wouldn't you? And the reason for that is, and this is where the practical comes in, the reason for that is actually you can steer a dinghy using the first 4 on that list. So you don't actually need to use a rudder. So if you remember how the sails are balanced, if you've got the jib on, then it'll pull the boat away from the wind. If you've just got the mainsail on, then that'll pull it towards the wind. So of course, if you've got the sails balanced, then they're not competing. They'll work together and make the boat go forwards. If you remember that the side to side balance, that has an impact. If you sit too heavily on one side, it'll bend the boat away from the wind. If you lean into the boat and bend it the other way, it will then take the boat up into the wind. So of course, if you have a flat boat, what does that do? It neutralizes all of those and actually makes the boat go forward. And the same with the trim. If you sit correctly in the boat, you are reducing the forces on the hull that actually force the boat to go in one direction or the other. And the centerboard, you normally bring it up about 1/3 to a half when you're sailing rudderless, because that just helps when it comes to fine tuning the steering of the boat. It's an amazing, once you get it right, it is pretty cool. Actually, you feel this weird sense of achievement that actually your rudder at the back there is not being touched. You've let it go completely and you're able to sail in a straight line. When I did my dinghy instructor's course all those years ago, we had to do a pre-assessment over 2 days, and on both days they made us sail without a rudder around a triangular course. So if we weren't running a session, or that's what we were doing. It was, you know, it's pretty cool. Actually, it's well worth, when you get a boat, when you're out there, just go and do it, because actually, you know, it is pretty. It's a really good skill to have. And what you then find you do is that you use your rudder less when you're sailing. And I found this when I used to sail on a 49er, which was a pretty high spec double trapeze boat, that actually everything was done using the sail and boat balance. So you rarely used that rudder. The rudder was there if you cocked it up and you needed to quickly do a violent maneuver and you yank the rudder one way or the other. So we would demonstrate the 5 essentials on a level 2, and then on a level 3 course, we'd actually even get you to have a go at sailing without a rudder, because that's just bringing your skills up to the next level. So this diagram, which I nicked off someone's website, really is the sort of recap of the 5 essentials, about making sure that you think about your sail set when you're upwind, when you're then on the reach, and then as you're going downwind, where your dagger board is on each of those points of sail, the trim of your boat on each of those points of your sail, and the balance of your boat. And as I move you a lot across the other side of the screen, and then the course made good, which is really the most efficient course that you can sail, depending on what's going on, both with the water, your boat, and with the conditions. So one thing that John and I haven't mentioned, that just as a quick aside, as you become more and more experienced with sailing, you'll start to sail with a sail called a spinnaker. And that's a really light sail that comes out the front, and it's usually highly colourful. And there are 2 types of spinnaker. There's a conventional spinnaker or a symmetric spinnaker, and an asymmetric spinnaker. So if you have 2 boats, one that has a conventional spinnaker and one with an asymmetric spinnaker, they will do a very different course made good to make sure that that spinnaker works efficiently, because a symmetrical spinnaker, which is what Eve's got on her Miracle, that means you can sail dead downwind and your quid's in. The asymmetric spinnaker, if you sail dead downwind, that spinnaker will collapse. It does not have enough of that high pressure, low pressure in it to make it work efficiently downwind. So it has to sail at much more of an angle downwind. So the course therefore is different. So you might find on a downwind leg going from upwind to downwind that Eve in her Miracle doesn't have to put any jibes in at all. She can go in a straight line down to that mark. But John and I, in my later 2000, will have to zigzag downwind in order to keep that spinnaker flying. But the compensation for having to sail a greater distance downwind is that you sail faster. That's the idea. Yeah. So in theory, you know, Eve and I could start off at the same point, and then we can race each other, her in a straight line and me zigzagging, and then you can see who then has the faster boat as to who gets down there first. So that, and we would run a different course. So that's what course made good. Don't compare yourself to another boat if you find that actually they've got sails that are either bigger or a different shape to yours, because they'll be working to a different game plan.
That's where the handicap comes in.
And that's where the handicap comes in. I realized I slightly complicated it, but I just wanted you not to think that if John's in his laser and I'm in my 2000, that we will basically sail the same course, because actually we wouldn't.
Yeah. And also you get people like Richard that take like a completely obscure route from one mark to the other mark, and you wonder what's going on, why they're doing that. But really it's because they've got like years of local knowledge and they've sussed out the exact way to get there efficiently.
It's using the tide.
Yeah, using the tide.
And the eddy, the back eddy. Yeah.
So they're just making really good advantage of course made good.
Yeah.
But sometimes they might be wrong, and you might find that you might be able to plot a better route.
You always want to be the second boat on the first lap of a race, so you can watch the leader and you either nick their good ideas or you learn from the mistakes that they make.
Especially sailing down there, you need to, the tide is so strong.
Can I just add something?
Yes.
I've just put something on chat, and if you want to remember all of them, all of the 5, there's a neat little mnemonic. Can this boat sail correctly? C for centreboard, T for trim, B for balance, S for sail settings, correctly for course made good. You can see that on the chat if anybody's interested.
Cheers, Pat.
Yeah.
Oh, amazing.
So that really is the 5 essentials. Level 2, you get demonstrated on the water by the instructor. You get to do it. You do the recap on land. So it's sort of stuck in your noggin. These slides are for you guys just to sort of take away and refresh your memory. They are mentioned in, I think, one of the sailing handbooks as well. It's really very basic stuff, but the more you sail, the more you understand them, the less you actually start to think, the less you think about them. They just become natural. But everyone does it. Some people do it more efficiently than others. And also go out there and experiment. Even on Saturday, if we're out on the water, you know, and it's, you know, and there aren't, let's say there aren't too many of you, and we are able to really focus on each of you a lot of time, then you know, we'll get you to move around the boat, and you can feel the difference of how the boat actually how the boat responds.